Michael F. Schein is an author of a wonderful book called The Hype Handbook.
I think that one of our strongest impulses is to be tribal, and we really define ourselves as much or more so by what we're against than what we're for. I was convinced Donald Trump was the greatest hype artist of all time. There's propaganda and manipulation happening on both sides depending on what you want to believe. I was on a business trip, and I remember this really clearly. I was laying on top of the comforter reading, and I was reading a book called The Crowd by Gustav Le Bon. And this guy was writing things about what crowds respond to in this sort of fervent way. Your Gary Vaynerchuk's, your Tony Robbins, your Brene Brown's, but also your Donald Trump's, your Barack Obama's, also your David Bowie's, also your Andy Warhol's. They all got all of this, not just attention, but fervent dedication. And what I asked myself was, are there underlying principles that are similar? And I would keep note cards of all the behaviors that I saw. There are 12 buckets of the way these people behave, whether they're doing it for civil rights, for Nazism, for a religious cult, or for rock music, that you just see over and over. But I'm actually a little nervous as we're talking because I'm a professional who owns a business. So my heart's beating a little, even having this conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and today I'm going to be rejoined by a guest that I had on a number of years ago. Michael F. Schein is an author of a wonderful book called The Hype Handbook. This is a book that I've read couple of times. I think it's excellent. It's obviously in the space that I absolutely adore, which is everything to do with propaganda and hype and influence and persuasion and the stories that we tell and how they influence others. And I remember the interview that we've done before, and you can check that out on the past episodes at owenfitzpatrick.com if you go through the archives. But the last episode we did together, it was so much fun and so enjoyable. And so I figured I would get in the car and drive out to Michael and meet Michael and interview him and have one of those wonderful conversations that we always have every time we meet up. So Michael, thank you very much for doing this.
Oh, and this is amazing. I am happy about this for a couple of reasons. One is that we're talking again. We have just met in person for the first time.
That's right.
And two, it is about 4 minutes by car from my house. So that is very exciting.
Well, that's great because I didn't have to hype up the podcast too much to get you on it. But listen, let's get straight into it. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris. Some people are going to be watching this after the election, if there's still a world. And some people are watching this before the election. This is going to go out before the election.
Yeah.
Could you talk about what Trump and Harris both do in relation to hype?
So, yeah, we live in interesting times, to say the least, right? Because a lot of my certainties that I had when I first thought of this book have been completely poked at and challenged and twisted around. So what I mean by that is, so one of the reasons I wrote this book or conceived of this book, and this was many years ago that I considered, the book came out in 2021, but I had, thought of the book well before that. It was the first Trump election, and he was up in the debate against, whatever it was, 17 Republicans. And he was looked at as a reality television game show host, right? And a casino guy. No one thought he had a chance of winning. And he was saying all this outlandish stuff. And I was on a business trip, and I remember this really clearly. I was laying on top of the comforter reading. And I was reading a book called The Crowd by Gustav Le Bon.
Another one, yeah.
Right. So
it's a classic, yeah.
Right. And it's old. It's probably the first book on crowd psychology.
Sure.
It's from, I think, 1898.
Yeah.
And this guy was writing things about what crowds respond to in this sort of fervent way. And Donald Trump was talking, and I was looking at the book at the same time, and it would say things like, crowds are obsessed or swayed by future-focused, vague language. And I was hearing him say, make America great again. He was saying crowds are won over by prestige, overt displays of prestige. If there is no prestige, money is an excellent substitute. So I came home from this business trip, and I said, to people I know, I'm like, Trump's going to win. And everyone was like, you're an idiot. And we know what happened, right? So that was where I was at. I was convinced Donald Trump was the greatest hype artist of all time. However you think of him politically, whether you hate him, love him, somewhere in between, greatest hype artist of all time. Still think that's true. However, I have to say, I thought that maybe the Democrats weren't coming from a similar place, that they just were kind of talking about policies and this and that. And I have just been blown away in this latest bizarre political environment that we're in about how both sides think the other side are these like propaganda artists and they're totally morally pure and have the truth. So a few things with the left now compared to the right, because I was right. So the first,
I want to make sure we're getting people from both sides hating on you at the end of this.
That's my goal, because I remember Michael Jordan once said, when they told him to speak out for Democrats, he said Republicans buy sneakers too. I want to make sure no one buys my stuff.
Right.
You know, right? So yeah. So what I found interesting, two things, right? So the first thing happened during COVID, right? So on the left, the Democratic side, whatever you want to call it, it was just gospel that Republicans and conservatives were being completely irresponsible. They were having rallies without, indoors, packing all these people in, and they would say, believe the science. How could you possibly have these people doing this at a time like this? And then George Floyd was murdered, which was a horrible, horrible thing, right? But suddenly it became okay for 30,000 liberal demonstrators in the middle of a pandemic to go out on the streets packed in like sardines and protest because it was the right cause. And suddenly, they said, oh, well, they were wearing masks. Yeah, but they were getting tear gas. They were spitting all over the place. Yeah, it was outside. You can't get COVID as easily. Well, no one knew that at that point. And doctors were actually applauding this. And I said, oh, I understand. So the virus is a Democrat.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I realized that these ideas that one side has a monopoly on the truth and one side are just propagandists and are all about Fox News and twisting these gullible people's minds. I realized that that's not actually accurate. That there's propaganda and manipulation happening on both sides depending on what you want to believe. The other thing I thought was so interesting happened much more frequently and we were talking about this before the thing, Kamala Harris, I still don't know much about her, right? But she was looked at as a very unpopular figure. I mean, people were on talk shows saying, oh, how do you have someone like this? She's so unpopular. Her laugh is so annoying. No one knows what she does, da-da-da-da-da. The minute this decision was somehow unilaterally made that Biden was inept, which 2 days before that debate, he was perfectly fine, right? It was like everyone just in unison swung to the other side, and Kamala Harris is the savior. She's the greatest politician in all time. She represents joy with a capital J. And it's really messed with my mind. I mean, I know how these dynamics work. I've done so much research on this. But when you're in the middle of it, it's disorienting.
For me, coming as a Irish person into America, this is my first election, as in that I'll be able to vote. Where I come from, to be honest, in Ireland, most of the politicians are in the middle, right? There's not extremist like there is here or like there is in certain other countries.
Which I want to chime in, that is a new phenomenon in the United States. When I was growing up, it was the consensus was that people weren't that into politics. They were trying to get voter turnout up. People were in the middle. So it's interesting that you say that.
But I also think that we could talk forever about the polarization. But the polarization, which happens throughout history as well, but it's been really accelerated because of the media and social media. So on the one hand, the media, it's almost the media helps divide us and social media helps keep us there and make us further away.
That's right.
And if you take Fox News, for example, you can't look at Fox News and not see that they're extremely one-sided. Sure. But you can't look at CNN and not see that they're extremely one-sided.
100%.
Or MSNBC.
Or the New York Times lately, for that matter. Yeah.
So to me, the key is, it's the stories that they're telling themselves. What's devastating about it is that everyone believes, not everyone, a lot of people believe they've a monopoly on truth. 100%. And their story is true. And everything that doesn't fit into their story is wrong. And not only that, but anyone who believes anything other than that is either stupid or evil.
Right.
If you listen to a lot of people on the left, if Trump wins, we're going to be in a fascist dictatorship. If you listen to anyone on the right, if Harris wins, we're going to be in a communist state.
100%.
And this is hyperbole at its finest. And this is not just what people are saying, this is what people believe. And it's happening, as you said, on both sides. It's a propaganda war, it's a story war.
But if you bring that up in the wrong circles,
Sure.
you're kind of ostracized, right?
Yeah.
That's how tribal it is. So like if I were to say, yeah, Trump, you may disagree with him, but Nazi? Is he a Nazi? Like an actual fascist? Like, did he put people in death? He was president for 4 years. You could say he was a good or a bad president, right? He didn't disband the New York Times. He didn't put people in death camps. He didn't, change the flag to whatever white power flag, but he's a Nazi.
But
yeah.
But I can hear a million yes
Okay,
buts right now saying to you, yeah, but he did this, yeah, but he did that, yeah, but he did the other. But your point isn't that he was a great president.
It's not my point at all.
Of course.
Yeah.
Your point is that just because he did a number of things doesn't equate him to, let's say, Adolf Hitler, which a lot of people try to push in. And what happens is it's also to anyone who's anywhere in the middle. If you turn around and you start to equivocate one person with somebody else who murdered millions and millions of people, it kind of takes away from your argument, because
100%.
now no one's going to believe you because it's hyperbole, because you're exaggerating. And to me, that's one of the challenges.
That's
is
right.
It's not just demonizing the other side is not right, but it's also when you do that, what you do is you galvanize the right as well, or you galvanize the left.
100%. Or calling someone a communist who's not a communist. And, this is nothing out of my book. This is just me always thinking about this stuff, as we all are. But I think sometimes the problem is that a win is never a win. So when a certain team gets what they want, the slope keeps going, because that's the fuel for the fire. So I'll give you an example. So, and you can tell me what you think about this, because this is me just musing.
Yeah.
So people mobilized to take down Confederate statues at the risk of betraying my political beliefs. I think that's a good thing. I come from Jewish heritage. I wouldn't want to walk past Rommel's statue on the street. They were traitors to the United States, quite literally. They promoted slavery. I understand why those statues should have been taken down. So they were, a lot of them. So instead of saying, wonderful, we achieved someone, the progressive left in general said, you know what, though? That's not enough. We also need to take down the statues of Thomas Jefferson, because he owned slaves. He was a founder of the country. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, but he owned slaves. And you could say, well, I'm not sure that's the same, but okay. He owned slaves. I'm starting to feel a little uncomfortable now. I'm saying, but there's something, but he wrote the Declaration of Independence. The morals were different back then, but okay, right? Some of that happened. They changed the names of schools. And then I heard quite a few people go to a campaign that they should take down the statues of Abraham Lincoln, the man who quite literally freed enslaved people in this country and led the North to go against the side that was trying to secede. Because even though he freed enslaved people, he wasn't pro-black. So what happens then if Abraham Lincoln and Stonewall Jackson from the Confederacy are exactly the same, then it's all nonsense. Sure. Then it's all irrelevant. And I think that's what you're saying. It's that if Adolf Hitler is a Nazi and Ronald Reagan was a Nazi and Mitt Romney was a Nazi, and Donald Trump is a Nazi, then the word Nazi has no meaning. And if Kamala Harris is a communist and Stalin was a communist, so there's this what do you think that's about, this tendency to not say, we had a victory, let's leave it at that?
I think, honestly, it's a big part of it's virtue signaling. So I think, if you look at cancel culture, there's a benevolent intention to some degree with, because the idea is, I want to make sure that we cancel the people that are saying offensive things or discriminating or being, and I get that and I understand where it's coming from. But a lot of this cancel culture, it can be taken in a direction where all of a sudden you ban books and you don't want anyone to read 100%. Books. And as soon as you start to do that, what you're trying to do is you're trying to force feed set people with your wagging finger saying, this, I know what's best and this is what's best. But I don't believe that a lot of when you get to the extreme level, I believe a lot of that's me saying to you, look how virtuous I am,
I'm the
Michael.
right kind of person.
I want you to
Yeah.
know, Michael, that I'm a very good person and I stand against this. And I'm even more of a good person. And if you get to the point where anyone that anyone that does anything whatsoever, you're triggered by or you make a big deal about, then what happens is people turn around, and I've heard myself say this as well, which is you can't say anything these days, right? And as soon as you say that, then it gives the people who actually will say messed up stuff
100%.
the permission to say it, because it's, oh, you're just a typical liberal getting offended.
100%.
Well, there's a difference between saying offensive things and saying things that I have to work hard to be offended by.
Right.
So for me, I look at these things and I just see this as it's an effort. I'm trying to dictate the narrative, and I'm trying to say, if you don't agree with me, this makes you this type of person.
Right. The tribe.
That's
right?
the tribe.
Yeah.
And I see this everywhere. And obviously in your book, one of the things you talk about is like, this is what the most successful people are doing in order to be able to cultivate that. But I also see it as something that is very problematic for this country as well as the world in general. And I see it being made worse because once again, we're getting reinforced. And so it's very difficult to talk to someone who's already like, I've got friends of mine that are extremely liberal, and I've got friends of mine that are extremely conservative. I've got people that I know that are huge Trump supporters and people that hate him.
Yeah.
And in having conversations with all of them, there's a challenge that they have. And if you talk to a Trump supporter, it's very hard for them to admit anything bad about him. If you talk to someone who hates him, it's very difficult for them to say anything positive at all about him. And so from your perspective, Michael, when you're having those conversations, you've obviously got your own beliefs, but how do you have conversations? Because in America, it's like people are scared to talk about politics.
Yeah, I think part of the reason it's easier to not have these conversations is that it's really uncomfortable in a true sense. It's really disorienting. I'll say that I was guilty for most of the first Trump term of surrounding myself by people who believed what I did, because those years felt so tense and so disorienting. And recently, I've really gone out of my way by choice and also by circumstance to do what you've done, to talk to people who don't believe the things I'm believing. And part of that is because the side that I more identify with has a few points of view that I strongly disagree with. And even by bringing those conversations up, it's not like, let's talk about that. It's you're a this and you're a that and you're an apostate. And that was so distasteful to me and so disorienting that I decided to go out and figure out what the other people are thinking who I thought were so misguided. And you know what? I still disagree with a lot of what they say, but they have really good reasoning for a lot of what they believe. And it's very uncomfortable, but it's allowed me to engage maybe my critical thinking in a way that just surrounding myself with the same kinds of people doesn't do. So I live in the town we're sitting in right now is called Beacon, New York. It's a town that 50 years ago was very salt of the earth factory town. 30 years ago was a decaying, the industry had dried up. And now it's gentrified, right? They call it Old Beacon and New Beacon. So there's a lot of creative class people, and it's incredibly, for the most part, progressive and liberal. And maybe it's the sort of punk rock part of me, but the uniformity of thought, and I love the people here, but like a friend of mine who is more conservative said that someone said to them, I was taking a jog and I had to drive by a Trump sign and I'll never take that route again. And it's like, wow, you literally are that offended. You cannot jog by the 5 letters that form your opponent's name. Yeah. Something's off. And seeing that and talking to other people it's my brain has been frazzled, maybe in the right way lately.
There's two elements to that. One is a quick one, which is how easy it is for us to get triggered because we buy into this victim mindset that I have to live in a life where you don't trigger me, where you don't affect me. So that word triggers me, therefore right. You need to do something about that. But then the other one is when it comes to the nature of the left and the right and all that sort of stuff, to me, what I've found is that this failure of people to actually hear the other side, and not only that, they immediately want to position you as if you're not with me, you're against me. And if you don't believe everything I believe, then you're not with me,
Right.
which means you're the same as the other side. And I see a lot of the extremists on both sides tend to almost have more in common with each other
100%.
than they do in anyone, anywhere moderate.
100%.
And there's another one I wanted to talk about. So Tulsi Gabbard, and for
Yeah.
anyone who's watching from outside of America, she's a former Democrat. She was in the debates against Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden when Joe Biden got elected. And RFK. So RFK, Robert Kennedy, who was initially a Democrat up to recently, then became an independent, and now is over on the Trump side. When I see this happen, and it's not just those, it could be like podcast hosts as well, that are more liberal. If you look at the two narratives, right? So if you say RFK, he was a Democrat, then he went into the middle, and then he went into the Republican side. Now, the side of the Republicans, the way Republicans would see that is RFK, he's rational for a Democrat, but finally he's seen the truth.
That's what they think. I mean, that's how they frame it.
The
Yeah.
Democrats would frame it like this. He was already crazy because of the conspiracy theories,
Right.
so he's a nut job. And now he's gone full nut job because he's been brainwashed into the right and he's only doing it for a power grab.
That's so right on.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are the two. Now I have a third thesis, and I'm
Yeah.
not saying this is right, but I'd love to hear your perspective. And I'm going to say the same thing. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat, right? Again, people were good. Once again, she's moved over. I'm not saying she's fully Republican, but she's certainly a lot more in that area than she was before.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The Democrats will say she's gone to the dark side.
Yeah.
She's been hugged in. She's a loser. She's cowered to the right.
They always say crazy. That's
Crazy.
the word that they use. Yeah.
Yes, or weird is the new
Yeah,
one.
right. The new word. Yeah.
And then the Republicans will say she's finally seen the light. She
Right.
realizes the Democrats are nothing but communists creating,
Right.
manipulators who are this and that. So these are the two narratives. I have a third narrative. My third narrative is just a theory. It's just hypotheses, but it is that the reason why Tulsi has moved to the right is largely because of the left. And the reason why RFK is moved to the right is largely because of the left. And when I say the left, I'm not saying even the direction of the party. I'm saying that as soon as you don't, it's a little bit like yourself, Michael. It's as soon as someone doesn't tolerate any sort of different direction that you're going in, they're now labeling you as you're not one of us.
You're an apostate. You're a heretic.
That's it. And as soon as you become that heretic, you start to move over. And then it's almost like you're rewarded for being one of the Democrats we actually can listen to. Right? Tulsi, you went on Joe Rogan. You talked about the problems with the Democratic Party. Well, I'm a Republican, and let me tell you, you're one of the ones I like, right?
And the Republicans, think about Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
If you looked at the way that Democrats talked about that woman before she stood up against Trump's, messing with the election officials and all of that, she was, I don't know, they probably called her Hitler a few times. I mean, she's the worst, and neocon and this and that, and she's just her father's lapdog and this and this. And now it's like, she defected. She went over to the right side, and she had such courage, and this and that. And maybe she did have courage, right? But it's the same exact thing. I think that's such a good hypothesis. It reminds me of in religions, right? It's like nothing made other religions happier in like the medieval times than like, what did they call it? The Saracen, which is what they used to call Muslims who became Christians, or the Native American tribe who would capture a white girl and then the girl would stay with the tribe. Nothing gives a better narrative than that, because it's like, it's one thing if you're born into a faith, because these are faiths that we're talking about. But if you choose it from your heart, if you have that purity of heart,
then you become the evidence that this is
we're
correct.
Right. That's very wise what you're saying.
But I think a lot of times it really does come from we create our own devils. What I'm simply saying is, I think the more we attack someone, the more of a deal we make them, and the more that makes them want to actually be that person.
I mean, religious cults, the thing that they do that is the most effective is they create a sense of persecution, right? Like if you looked at the Jonestown thing, that if you look at his speeches, Jim Jones, it was these people are coming after us. They don't understand us. The original, I mean, it just every religion, I mean, the martyrs in Christianity, right? It's this idea that like we are being attacked, and to die for this cause is a beautiful thing. You know what I mean? And I think, Trump, we do know that he's driven by acclaim and prestige and praise, right? And where's he getting it from? And the other side is lambasting him. So he's become this great, defiant figure with the fist in the air as he's being shot at, right? And one other thing I want to say, you mentioned a great point that the extremes become a lot like each other, right? They become like this horseshoe. I want to run by you something that I've seen that's interesting with the banning. So what people will say is Republicans ban books and Republican governments want to do that. And that's true in schools, right? Although there are some debates about whether that counts when it's in children's libraries. But let's say that's true. But I literally saw videos on social media, so who knows, but of progressives throwing Harry Potter books in a fire. Now, they're not the government, but you either believe in the free exchange of ideas or you don't. So do we only care about those books whose ideas we agree with getting an audience? So I'd be interested in your thoughts on all of this.
I mean, for me, the challenge is that when you have a book, the problem is you are propagating information with that book.
Right.
And you have the ability to influence a lot of people,
Right.
like you do if you got a YouTube channel, like you do if you got a podcast, like you do if, whatever. But the problem is that when you have somebody who has a pulpit to be able to communicate ideas, then they have the opportunity to influence people potentially to do really, really bad things. And when I went to North Korea years ago, I remember being asked when I came back to New York, or when I came back to the States, they said to me, it must have been crazy to see the propaganda there. And I said, well, the difference between North Korea and America primarily is that North Korea has one point of view that you're allowed. America's two.
But it's all propaganda. Right. But
it's not. And they're way more obvious about it. But ultimately speaking, it's the same thing.
It's getting more obvious here every day, it is. Honestly.
But again, there's the stories. And over there's one story, you believe in it or you're in trouble. Over here, it's two stories. You believe in it or you're not part of either.
Down the line, all 27 points of that story. Right.
Or else.
Right.
And so for me, when I look at the banning of the books, on the one hand, I understand why people are scared of the ideas, because ultimately, if you've got a very persuasive character, like, crazy Hitler, he was very convincing. He had it. Now, it was also the time, it was the Treaty of Versailles, it was a multitude of factors environmentally. But he won
through democracy.
But he won and pushed his way and manipulated, but his ideas were dangerous. They were despicable, they were evil. Like, there was a lot of the stuff he was propagating through Mein Kampf. But that being said, I still think that when we ban, we're turning around saying that we are the moral compass. That's the problem.
So that's exactly it. So imagine, and again, maybe we shouldn't have free speech. I don't know. But if you believe in free speech, you believe in free speech. If you believe in freedom of the press, you believe in freedom of the press. Maybe in the age of social media, we can't have that anymore. However, imagine it was the year 1350, right? It was considered 100% certain that, the sun revolved around the earth, that, all of this stuff. And if you said something against that, you were doing a terrible thing, because if someone who believed you, they would burn in hell forever. Yeah. Now we can laugh at that. We have science, we have evolution. I mean, put yourself in their shoes. You have this crazy person, Spinoza, whoever, I'm getting the dates wrong, sitting there saying that you should believe whatever you want, and people become convinced by that. You're going to burn in hell. That's the devil seducing you. So maybe they were right to burn those people at the stake. Maybe they were right to destroy those books because they had the truth.
But also, if you look back at Socrates obviously asked questions to challenge people. His whole thing was letting people know, I know you think you're right, but actually
you know nothing. All I know is that I know nothing.
Exactly.
Is what he said. Yeah.
And that's a couple of thousand years ago. We still haven't learned the lesson. He's a household name to most people would know who Socrates, or at least would have heard the name Socrates.
Often from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
For sure.
Socrates.
We'll take it wherever we get it. Socrates. But the issue is that when you look at this whole message, we still haven't gotten the point, because we're still falling into the trap of wanting to believe something, being convinced, and then going down that route.
It's amazing how asking questions now will get you in trouble. It's become a slur. I've heard people make it as a joke. They say, "Oh, just asking questions," as if that's you trying to actually be a bigot or a horrible person. But I want to, I don't know. Can I ask the question to try to get to the truth? I mean, I'm not going to just accept what you believe.
But you know why I think maybe people are feeling that way more is also because questions have become weaponized. If you look at, you take Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow, and I'm obviously using both on both sides. It's going, it's the easiest thing in the world is to ask a question that immediately sort of pokes holes. It's like rhetorical questions that pokes holes in that side. Without having to have evidence.
Do you know anybody who was in a gas chamber in a death camp? I don't. Just asking questions.
That's right. Exactly. You know? Exactly. And to me, the problem is now all questions are now lumped into the one thing. So we have that and we have that. I love this conversation, Michael. I am thinking that there's going to be people that no matter what we would do and how we would preface it and how we would frame it, people are still going to say, "I can't believe that you're saying X." And
of course,
I think, why do you think it is that even if you're talking about this stuff, if you have someone on one side or the other, they're going to interpret this? Like, I feel that people can interpret this conversation in two vastly different ways. If you're, let's say, on the left or right, as soon as we say the magical words Trump or Harris, like abracadabra, you can have people that will immediately go after you no matter what you're saying because you're not 100% of their side. Why do you think that happens?
Well, first of all, I want to say I have this problem where I can't keep my mouth shut about what I really think, but I'm actually a little nervous as we're talking because I'm a professional who owns a business. I have people in both parties who pay for my services. And I know that's how people are now. People will interpret anything less than complete, either not talking about the politics or complete adherence with one side as you being a communist or a fascist, right? So my heart's beating a little, even having this conversation. Sure. I think it's what you said. I think that one of our strongest impulses is to be tribal, and we really define ourselves as much or more so by what we're against than what we're for. And I think that, people talk about how the United States in the past was very unified and this is a new thing. It's not a new thing. I mean, we had between the 40s and 1991, we had first the Axis powers to unify us against, and then the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. And I think it's no coincidence that as soon as the Eastern Bloc fell apart, the divisions that were in our country were coming out. I think the social media solidifies it. I think people are in silos. I know people who are conservatives, and a lot of times they tell me all these things they're seeing that sound kind of like, wow, you're seeing an entirely different reality and world than people in Beacon, New York are seeing in their social media feeds.
And that's kind of why, I suppose, for me, I've always tried to, even in terms of, I talk a lot about beliefs, a lot about stories, but I've always tried to get people to realize, from my point of view, I have political beliefs. I have strong enough political beliefs, and you have too. Yeah. But I don't feel you've given me any of your political beliefs, or I've given you none of mine.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Because what we're talking about is the method.
Right.
And regardless of everything, that's what I'm interested in, because, and this comes to my sort of final conclusion, then I want to move into, less political things. So we've actually, some of this podcast to post, is I genuinely believe that the majority of people on both sides have really good hearts and are good values and care about the country and care about each other and are just really good people. And to me, the problem is the loudest voices, the most hyped up voices, the people that are using the stuff that, we've seen, they are the ones that are creating this division and creating this hate. And to me, I'm not saying we can all kumbaya, we're all going to hold hands, but I really feel it, and this is something that I've talked to a number of people about, curiosity is the key.
It is.
We need to start to learn more about each other and respect the fact we might have different positions, but deep down we have a lot more in common.
If you can find, I think the best cure for this is if you can find someone in your life who you truly care about, who believes different things than you believe, and instead of fighting with them, sit down and ask them, you might not still agree with them, but you'll probably see a kernel of why they've come to what they've come to. I mean, that's happened to me recently. Sure. Someone really important in my life is of a different political persuasion than me, and I still don't agree with a lot of what this person thinks, but this person's very smart in addition to being someone that I care about.
Yeah.
And they don't just say, oh, I hate this and I hate sure. that and this. They have very well-reasoned ideas for what they believe. And as a result, my ideas have become more nuanced. And sure. I think people should try to do that.
Yeah, and I think it'll make us all smarter for us. And I think part of it's accepting that you don't have all the answers.
Right.
And you're not necessarily right either. But I think once we give ourselves permission not to be right, then it's much easier for us to really understand each other. 100%. In terms of then the same ideas in the self-help stroke, thought leadership stroke, personal development world, there's a lot of speakers out there. Who do you see as being particularly good today from a marketing point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you dig into any of the names that we all know, if we're in the thought leadership space, I mean, I think your audience is pretty diverse in terms of why they come to your show, but it's probably pretty familiar, I guess, with the whole thought leadership sure. sort of personal expert space. And so, yeah, any of your Simon Sinek's and Marie Forleo's and Gary Vaynerchuk's and, you know, all of these people.
And Jordan Peterson.
Well, he's sort of political almost,
sure.
right?
But well, what's interesting is, and this is sort of, again, we're not going to go back to the political, but Jordan Peterson, he has made himself political, and most of his content's political,
right.
but his books are
not
very apolitical. Like I've read and studied all three of his books. He chooses to go on the political route, but people know him as the psychologist, and in many ways, while he's despised politically by the left, in terms of psychology, he's an awful lot of...
Well, I have to go there for a second because he's a perfect example. You know, we were talking before, this is a good segue into the people who bring the most attention to themselves. Because he was so maligned by the left, he doubled down, he tripled down, he quadrupled down. But also, it made him a rich man. I mean, he was a pretty successful college professor. He's a multi-millionaire. He has armies of people following him. And listen, he has become, I mean, the guy's got digital courses and this and that. I mean, he's squeezing every dollar of that thing that he can. Because for better or worse, he's saying, okay, I'm going to be your boogeyman. That makes me that much more attractive to all of the people out there,
and also,
you know, over here. Let's look at Simon Sinek, who I think does a really good job in this, because Simon Sinek is somebody who, and he would probably admit this, in fact, I think he's even said this in his books, he doesn't come up with new ideas. So he wrote a book called The Infinite Game, which everyone was wonderful about. The first thing he says in the book is, I used as a source this other book. Sure. You look up the other book, it's the exact same idea, but more nuanced and better and with more detail. So what he's a great packager and popularizer. So one thing is he practices radical simplification. People are not, I always say to my clients, be nuanced in your analysis and in your decision-making, be very black and white in your presentation and your communication, right? So he's very black and white in his communication. He's also created a persona, right? So he's, you know, kind of handsome. He wears these like spectacles. He kind of has this, depending on who he's talking to, sometimes he has an English accent, sometimes he has an American accent. And, you know, we Americans think if you have the hint of an English accent, you're like an aristocrat, even if you're from like, you know, the East End or whatever, you know. Yeah. And I think he uses slogans like start with why. He uses very simple diagrams. So, you know, it's funny. I saw him at a talk and he came on stage and he said, you know, I had this whole other talk prepared, but I was just like, right before this show, I decided there was just something else I wanted to talk about. Do you guys mind if I wing it? And everyone said, oh, of course. And he gave this note perfect speech, right?
Yeah.
There was no way he winged this.
Sure.
But everyone believed it. And I call that make yourself into a magus. So it's like, what a genius. He just came up with that off the top of his head. So I think I'm not a huge fan of his ideas. I don't think they're hurting anyone, but I think there are people who do have fantastic ideas who are so convoluted in the way they present things. They think their ideas are just going to rise to the top.
Sure.
And if you could take a page out of someone like Simon Sinek's book and package those complex ideas in a way that people can digest or create us versus them dynamics. Like that, something I often tell people, I might have talked about this on the other show, that I tell people, if you have an idea, instead of talking about how great your idea is, say, what is a point of view in my universe? So in my industry, in my corner of the universe, that other people consider like gospel, they just accept it, but I think is wrong. Because sometimes if you'll go out on a limb and say that, there's often all these other people out there who secretly think the same thing you do. And if you're the first one who steps up and says the emperor has no clothing, now you've created a new tribe.
But that's
And
also,
you're the leader of that tribe.
but that's also risky and difficult because you're also creating, in creating controversy, you're also creating, let's say, inverted commas, haters, or people who attack back.
It's not for the faint of heart. But the one thing I will tell people is there's a difference between controversy and contrarianism. So controversy is, I don't know, Simon Sinek and all of his ilk are idiots. I don't believe that, by the way, but that's controversy, being a troll, picking fights with people. Contrarianism might be most gurus. For gurus, packaging is more important than content. So it's a nuance, right? One is these people are morons and they're idiots and you're in controversy. One is I've noticed something other people don't, that there's a lot of flash and substance, a flash out there instead of substance. So I'm going to make a bold claim about that. So that's contrarian.
Sure.
But you're not being disrespectful,
And
you're not taking people down,
And I think what's interesting is sometimes if you're contrarian, if you challenge a particular thing, like if you say gurus are such and such, a lot of times gurus who you're actually talking about but you didn't mention, they'll agree with you
100%.
because nobody sees themselves as being that.
Like
it's hilarious for, let's say, thought leaders who want to be able to do better. You said, well, look, they could learn a lot from the packaging and the simplification. However, one of the challenges is that, let's say you've got a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, like a lot of academic credentials or whatever, and you've just got all of this convoluted ideas, but they're really powerful. But in communicating it to the wider audience, you have to simplify. And you have to simplify in such a way that, like Simon Sinek, start with why, you take all this stuff and you bring it down to one core idea, for example, the big idea book or the, high concept. That's difficult because you're deleting a lot of information. That's difficult because now you're communicating with language that's a bit more vague. And in doing so, less precise. And in that sense, potentially more cliche. So what are the ways that you can start to be more effective at delivering home impactful message that still stands out, that is precise enough, and that does what it needs to do?
I think there's a way to frame it to yourself in a way that makes that more palatable. And you know a lot about influence, right? So there's the foot in the door technique. I think if you think of certain communications as frontline communications that ease people into your way of looking at the world before they go in deep, right? So I think it's almost, I'm not calling you arrogant, but arrogant of all of us to think, well, if people don't get my more nuanced stuff, they're idiots and I shouldn't even have them as an audience. Why should they get your nuanced stuff? They don't have the knowledge that you have. It's the role of the communicator is to communicate. It's to open that door, right? So look, you go on a date, right? And there's two ways to date. You could be like, let me tell you everything about myself. I always, never, my father never paid me any attention when I was a child. And I had a manic episode at the age of 12 that put me in an institution for 3 years. And I have really bad eczema, and and it's like
You're definitely getting a second date.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
You don't lead with that.
Sure.
But if you get to know somebody and they become your partner and your other half, you open up, you let them know your warts, and at that point and we don't think of that as like, well, some people do. Some people are like, well, I'm gonna just be me. And those people struggle a lot with finding love.
That's also one of the things that I've talked to some folks about, is that there's this sort of, either it's almost like an extreme, either you're yourself, which means I'm completely me,
right,
which is authenticity, which is this. And then there's, on the flip side, there's the more like measured thing. I want to make sure that I'm positioning myself effectively.
Yeah.
On the one hand, first impressions matter. On the one hand, it is important, the impression you create. If you do go on a date, you want to be able to show up as your best self.
Right.
You don't want to just do exactly what you would do if you were sitting alone in your pajamas on a date.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, you also want to make sure that you're authentic and you're sharing that side. And so there's a bit of a balance there that I think sometimes people either don't want to work on, or they just don't know that they need to.
It's just, I don't think the idea that there's a true authentic self. I mean, am I more myself when I'm sitting on the couch with, I haven't showered all day with body odor watching TV than I am when I've showered and I'm,
Sure.
and no, I mean,
They're
both me, I mean, like,
And with that in mind, so like you have, and the reason I brought up Peterson was because so often when we talk about, let's say, thought leaders, effectively we talk about the more clean-cut thought leaders, such as Simon Sinek,
right,
even Gary Vee, Brené Brown,
sure,
Adam Grant. Like, these are all people who there's no real controversy there. I would argue that hype is a big factor. What do you believe that all of these people tend to do especially well, besides just packaging ideas?
Well, no, I mean, this sounds like a plug, but the book was written years ago now. The Hype Handbook came out of that exercise. So basically what happened was I was looking at, so a couple of things. I was running a marketing agency that dealt with a lot of consultants, right? And I would notice that some of my smartest consultants really scrapped and hustled for every piece of business they had. They didn't get the inbound work, everything was up and down. And they were a little bitter about it, in that they would say, all these other people who aren't as smart as me, just work comes to them. Their stuff is really simple, right? And then I would find, on the other hand, that all of these other people of vastly different fields, so your Gary Vaynerchuk's, your Tony Robbins, your Brene Brown's, but also your Donald Trump's, your Barack Obama's, also your David Bowie's, also your Andy Warhol's, they all got all of this, not just attention, but fervent dedication. And what I asked myself was, is this just something you're born with? Because if it is, there's not much you can do with that. Or are there commonalities that if you took the content away from it, are there underlying principles that are similar? So I really went hardcore researching. I read books, I interviewed people, I looked at papers, and I would keep note cards of all the behaviors that I saw, and I would like put them in categories. I stole this idea from like Robert Greene and Ryan Holiday. And I just started to see these patterns over and over. Like, you would see Andy Warhol doing the same thing as, like, I don't know, Warren Buffett or whatever, And so, yeah, it's those 12 principles. Like, there are 12 buckets of the way these people behave, whether they're doing it for civil rights, for Nazism, for a religious cult, or for rock music, that you just see over and over. So packaging is one, the tribalism is another, and tribalism can be very benevolent. I mean, Martin Luther King used it as "I hate hate," you know what I mean? And it's you just see these same. We could go through them, but we see these same patterns over and over and over again.
I think one of the interesting things I read recently was, in terms of rhetoric and in terms of the history of rhetoric, one of the things is the concept of truth. So a lot of people, we talked about it earlier, and this could be in politics, or it could be in any area of life. It's almost like we perceive truth as being, oh, truth is about fact. But actually, sort of an older version of what truth meant was much more about the feeling of it being true. And if you look at, for example, when someone speaks sort of spontaneously, there's a feeling when we hear that, as being that person is more true than someone else. We could call it authentic. So if I'm just randomly talking to you here, there's a different experience than if I have a speech that I'm reading out or communicating to you.
100. It feels more true. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
And if you have that spontaneous, you gave the example of, obviously we know Donald Trump goes off the thing and uses this, but also Simon Sinek. If you take it like, you know, I had a speech prepared, but I'm not going to do that. So often, I think one of the powerful ways that we have to communicate is by communicating off the top of our head. We're more authentic. We're sharing what's on our chest. And there's a certain honesty to that you don't get whenever you've any sort of obvious strategy put in. So you could have a written speech full of facts, or you could speak off the top of your head. And some people will feel that off the top of your head is more true because it is in this understanding of what we mean.
And then just to complicate things, if you speak off the top of your head in the wrong way, you'll be perceived as disorganized and rambling and incompetent, right? So it's like, it's a balance, right? It's like, don't seem overly rehearsed, but have a point, have strong beliefs, speak qualifying words are a killer. Like the worst kind of unprepared speech is when people say, well, we were talking before about how it's good to have questions, but if you convey too many questions in your public communication, that's a killer, even if it's more accurate. So if people are like, well, I'm not so sure, but could be wrong, but maybe, that's actually accurate. But if you convey that, you're suddenly not seen as an authority.
Jonah Berger, who has, I mentioned earlier, he is one of the blurbs on your book. He's a well-known author of a number of books, great psychologist. One of the things he talks about in his latest book is he has this notion where he talks about the way in which we communicate and the words that we use can very much create this identification for people. So if you label people in a certain way, that automatically, like if you label people as this type of person, a voter, they're more likely to vote than if you ask them to vote.
That's a great point.
But there's also these kind of ways of trying to communicate that I think we do automatically and we're not even aware of it. And I think what needs to happen is we need to start to get to the point where we're recognizing the way in which we're using language, that we're recognizing what's going on between us, because so often we think we're saying one thing, but actually the person listening has already their own story that they're telling themselves.
What's an example of that? That's really interesting.
So for example, if you're communicating with somebody and you're trying to persuade someone, oftentimes what you'll do is you'll try to resort to the facts. And you'll stack up the information that you have and you'll try to layer it there. The other person in their head is not listening to you as an information dispensing machine. So the more that you're trying to put that across, they're filtering it through a story they're telling themselves. And to me, the way I sort of say it is that we don't believe because of the stories we tell ourselves, we believe because of the stories that we sell to ourselves. So we have a million different stories we can tell about what we believe is true. But as you're describing your world, so right now people watching this podcast, as we talk about, let's imagine Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, or Jordan Peterson, as soon as we mention those names, for some of them, they're anema, they're like the worst person in the world. And as soon as we mention that, they're now going, okay, they better hate Peterson. As soon as we say anything positive, they're telling themselves a story that twists that.
Yeah, we've said positive and negative things about both those people, and I assure you, people listening and watching to this think both of us are raging conservatives or raging progressives.
Yes. But it's interesting because it's that artful vagueness. And once again, you mentioned at the beginning, it's like the early days when you're reading the crowd. One of the things you realized is that when large groups of people start to hear big, sort of grandiose statements, that's what moves them, because it's something that we can all get around, because we all have our own interpretations. We call it artfully vague in terms of, in NLP, it's called that. And to me, what I look for is recognizing the multitude of ways in which we can look at the same thing. And so I'm constantly challenging myself and constantly trying to understand the different points of view so that I can become richer. Because I look at Jordan Peterson, I did analysis of all his books, but I'm not like a #1 Jordan Peterson fan. But I also don't hate the guy. I'm like, I believe, as neutral as you can get, because from a psychology point of view of a lot of time and another area. So what I'm interested in is how they do what they do. not the
I'm
content
the
per
same way.
se.
Yeah.
And for me, that's one of the reasons, and just to bring this more towards, and one more question, but more towards a close, is why I love talking to yourself, Michael, is again, both of us are fascinated. Both of us have been studying the way we communicate to others about our beliefs and why we believe what we believe. From your own perspective, what do you think we need to be better at moving forward for the country to heal, for us to make more of an impact on people, for us to do better?
You know, I really do think that that earlier point I made about finding people that we care about and really care about and trying our hardest to get really curious about why they believe what they believe without immediately thinking that they're raging idiots or fascists or whatever is the best thing you can do. And I think the best way to do that is to engage in true diversity. And I don't mean that it could be racial diversity, but that's not what I mean. If you're in a racially diverse group, but everybody went to the same schools and has the same creative class jobs and has the same thing, you're not going to change your mind. So if you can expose, if more people made it a mission to expose themselves to environments that they're not naturally comfortable in. I mean, I've had the opportunity to have that happen to me accidentally. So a couple of times. So the most notable of which, I mean, I grew up in cities my whole life. I am very much from the North, even though I lived in Miami for a long time, but that may as well be the North. And I grew up in the middle class and probably the upper end of the middle class, professional parents and that kind of thing. I worked in a company that ran call centers, you know, and the call centers we had were in Appalachia, so in Duffield, Virginia, which is near Pennington Gap, which is like coal country. And the factories are closing up, the coal mines are drying up. These people did not make a lot of money at these jobs. The work is insanely hard. You're getting screamed at all the day in the call center. So I went down there. I was part of the kind of corporate, as they called it. I wrote and trained the scripts and trained classes. So I learned a couple of things. First of all, these people, the programs they were on were very difficult. It was health insurance and technology. So they needed to work 7 different computer systems. They had to understand claims charts, formularies, all of this stuff. They they were almost all white, but were poor and stuck as in any minority community in the country. There was all kinds of drama, drama. There were a million ways that the people in these towns were deprived of their dignity. Like coal mines, for example. One guy was telling me his dad worked in a coal mine and made more money than anyone else in the area, and he talked about his father with such beaming pride. And they're hearing that coal is destroying the planet, and if you believe in coal, you're a piece of garbage. Might be true about it destroying the planet. But these people were smart. They were so hardworking. They were paid so little money without benefits. And this was the company I worked for, And they were so kind, and some weren't. But then to come back to my bubble and hear about the deplorables and the rednecks and how race is everything and white privilege, I'm not saying those things don't exist. But by getting to know those people on a very deep level, because I would eat lunch with the teams, I would know the supervisors who usually came from the floor, gave me such a nuanced view that I never would have gotten living in my liberal enclaves in New York, When someone now says to me, oh, how do you believe in Trump? You're just a bigot, you're white privilege, you're destroying the environment, hillbilly. I say, have you ever known any of these people? Do you know what they're dealing with? Do you know how hard life is down there? You know what I mean? And how they're being told that they're nothing, that they're. So I think that, and I would say that that's true for people in areas that are red areas. Have you ever met, you think of California and New York as everybody's this raging communistic green haired whatever this. I mean, have you spend some time with those people, get to know them as human beings, and I think have conversations. And if we could all stop immediately flipping out the minute that someone says something that doesn't fit our tribal affiliation of what good and evil is, I think that would help too. I'm asking for something tough. I mean, I don't know if it's going to happen, but
Well, if people want to work with you, Michael, how do they get in touch, and what are the kinds of things that you do? And
well, I'd actually like to talk about this for a minute. I know we're at
Sure.
the end, but I've been engaged in something different and cool since we talked, which has been a while now. But as you know, I own a company called Microfame Media, and I was a writer before I was anything. I was a copywriter. I wrote fiction. I wrote songs. I wrote this book. But I had run a business that helped people using a lot of these hype principles, and still do. I still do this. Help them become kind of the most recognized authority in their niche. So we would do all kinds of things to do that. But something that we sort of started doing first as an ancillary service to our clients, but now it's become a big part of what we do, is a certain kind of book ghostwriting. So there's a chapter in the book called Write a Bible and Create a Church. And what that basically says is a book is still the best way to position yourself as an authority, but not any old kind of book. Just having some book called Leadership Strategies 4.0 or whatever, that doesn't do it for you. What you need is this book that tells people, in this corner of the universe, I have all the answers for you that you'll ever need. A book with a contrarian point of view. And we started to realize that a lot of our clients didn't have that. They had all this other stuff we were doing for them, but they couldn't ever be considered the dominant authority in their niche. So we started to write and create these books for people, and it's been a game changer. It really accelerated their point of view. People are working with publishers, people are getting the higher paid speaking gigs, people are growing their businesses. So a big part of the service we offer now is we'll create the book for people, this kind of book, but also something a lot of people don't know about nonfiction writing is that you usually sell a book on a book proposal. It's an extensive document. It can be 50 pages long that you pitch to agents and editors to get a book deal. So we do those. We also have a lot of connections with people in publishing. So we help shop the book. So essentially we conceptualize the idea, shop the idea, write the book, and help you turn that into a platform. So I've been really big into that lately, and it's been a ton of fun. So yeah, I mean, my website is Michael F. Schein, so MichaelFschein.com. Yeah, it's just that.
How to spell the name.
Yeah. Microfamemedia.com is my company. And I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to give everyone my cell phone number because let's see if anyone actually takes me up on this. No one ever, that's why I'm going to do it.
Given how much we were talking about politics, I'm not sure.
I know. I don't know. I'm going to do this is a suicide campaign. Ready?
All right.
1-917-273-9885.
Well, sure. Look, there's only one way to find out. Generally speaking, most of the people that watch Changing Minds, they're wonderful people.
They seem like it.
They're a lot more open-minded than the average bear. So a big thank you, Michael. As always, I really enjoyed this conversation. I loved the area we get into, and I'm already looking forward to the next time if you join us again.
I loved every minute of this. I hope I didn't open my mouth too wide during this show, but I loved every minute of it.
No, it was brilliant. That's all from us here. Again, a big thank you to Michael. This has been a really fun episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much for watching. Take care, be well, and as always, may the force be with you. Talk to you soon.